going to go ahead and get this thing started. Thank you so much for all the people who have joined us. My name is Roberto Clack, the Executive Director of Warehouse Workers for Justice, a worker center based outside of North America's largest inland port in Joliet, Illinois. Welcome to our Water for All, Protecting Water Access and Affordability event. Many people have asked, what does a worker center have to do with environmental justice and water rights? Great question. And it's a long story, and a long story short is WWJ was invited to speak on labor conditions as part of the consideration of the massive 3,000 acre plus North Point warehouse project proposed in Elwood, Illinois in 2017. There we shared our stories of widespread bad jobs, wage theft, and discrimination in the warehouse industry. And we learned about the issues of the community as well, the air pollution, infrastructure problems, quality of life issues, and the tax breaks to corporate America. 20 years of total tax abatement for the massive Centerpoint project in Elwood, helping to sink the tiny village of 2,200 into over $30 million in debt. Up the road in Romeoville, nearly $90 million in debt. Bolingbrook, over $300 million in debt. And the list of problems continues, including a plan of limitless development leading to uncertainty of the availability of what gives life itself, our water. Will County, where 3.5% of the nation's GDP is moved, is home to a who's who of corporate America. Amazon, Walmart, BNSF, Union Pacific, Best Buy, Home Depot, Target, corporate behemoths who dominate the area socially, politically, and economically. Bezos, the Walton family, Warren Buffett, they all have major investments there. When we look at the power and wealth represented by these giants, it's been our assessment that we need coalitions to hold them accountable, that it will take the warehouse worker, community members, and environmentalists to all join together to fight for justice for all. And we choose water, which gives us life. But what corporations like Amazon disproportionately depleted in the Southlands on the way to record profits. Lastly, we need a progressive politics of solidarity and working together on issues. Amazon and the rest of corporate America should pay a graduated rate so working class residents will pay less. But we need so much more than that. We need fair taxation for these global giants to make sure they are helping to upkeep our roads and infrastructure. We need to make it easier for workers to organize unions, and we need laws that protect warehouse workers at the front end of these projects. Lastly, we need provisions that protect our water rights and environment for those impacted by Amazon and their ever expanding footprint of pollution, transit pollution. We can and we will win, but we will need strong collaborations and coalition across the country, and we will need solidarity. Thank you. So we're gonna get into this. If you're out there on Facebook, please give us a share. If you have questions, definitely list that in the chat. We want to hear from the people out there on Facebook Live today. So please share. We're gonna get into this discussion. We are representing here with people from all around the country. We got the West Coast, the Inland Empire representing. We got East Coast Baltimore, and of course we got the Midwest. Joliet and Detroit are in the house. Let's give it up to all of our great speakers. I'm gonna bring up Monica first, who's gonna give an introduction. We, the people of Detroit, we're with you. We're fighting for water rights together. So why don't you give it up intro yourself before we get into some questions.
Well, first of all, peace and blessings, everyone. Roberto, you are amazing. I can't tell you what a privilege it is to be here with you and all the family of water warriors from across the nation, but specifically focusing on Joliet. I have to give a disclaimer. My grandfather's baby sister, Aunt Yankee, lives in Joliet. Her children, all of her children and grandchildren are in Joliet. So I have a personal affinity to the people of Joliet. And so I just want to try to connect the dots very quickly for why we, the people, had to show up today. We had to show up today because we understand the deep connection of organized labor with the human right to water. Very quickly, I have to lay out for you that General Gordon Baker, who was a legendary leader in the liberation of Black fighters for the human right to not only labor rights, but to water rights. He is married to the great Marion Kramer, who heads up Michigan Welfare Rights. She was a part of connecting with Joanne Watson, who was the author of creating a water affordability policy in 2005 that became the impetus for why we know we must have a human right to water in 2021. We are so grateful for this opportunity because we get that as goes labor, so goes the human right to water, because all of these things are deeply connected. What we found here in Michigan under the austerity of the previous governor, Governor Rick Snyder, and their haste to steal Detroit's water system, a system that provides water to 40% of the state of Michigan. 126 municipalities and townships get their water from Detroit. But it was never about making sure that water was clean, safe, and affordable. It was about being able to take over and have total political control over a major asset that is providing water to almost half the population of the state of Michigan. It also is a way to gentrify communities and take water and weaponize it against the very people that are paying for it. And as water is being more and more privatized, the rates are continuing to rise. We know, based on research done by Dr. Elizabeth Mack at Michigan State University in 2017, we were already on a fast track by the year 2022 for 35.6% of the nation not to be able to afford their water. Well, given the fact that we have now found ourselves in a global pandemic, we are already in that crisis. What we are now doing is putting out a call to the nation to organize with Joliet, and to organize with Benton Harbor, and to organize with the Navajo Nation, and to organize with undocumented communities, and make sure that every American has access to clean, safe, and affordable water. I want you to count we, the people of Detroit, in that fight. And we must deputize everyone to get in some part of this fight and be a part of making sure that we have this human right. Thank you, Roberto. You can count on us at We, the people of Detroit.
I'm loving it. I'm feeling the solidarity. I'm feeling your energy. Let's get into this fight together. Benton Harbor, Joliet, less than 100 miles away from the Great Lakes, and we're having water problems. This is a crime. We need to fight it. I'm going to bring up my sister next to do an intro. Andrea with the People's Collective for Environmental Justice, another warehousing community that's fighting against corporate power, that's fighting against bad jobs and corporate pollution, and warehouses and logistics company not paying their fair share. We're tired of it, from New Jersey to Joliet to San Bernardino, and I'm going to bring my sister up to speak on this.
Thank you, Roberto, and thank you all for having me here. My name is Andrea Vidaurre with the People's Collective for Environmental Justice. We're an organization part of the Athena Coalition. I'm here representing the environmental justice, climate justice table there. I live on unceded lands of the Tongva people out here in what's called the Inland Empire, who has its roots in imperialism and colonialism, and our region has always been used for corporate extraction, whether it's the warehousing and logistics industry now, or the orange industry in the past, or the military arms industry before that. Our region has always been used for that type of extraction, and so we are continuing to have this fight of building a resistance against that and continuing the fight that so many of our families in the past have led. We live in an area where our homes and our parks and everything is being taken away for Amazon and other large corporations to come in and bring in their e-commerce businesses. We're losing land faster than we can count. It's almost as if Starbucks is now, as if Amazon is the new Starbucks. It's on every single corner here. And we have the largest concentration of Amazon warehouses in the country, and Amazon is the largest employer here. And so dictating a lot of what our futures look like. We have billion-dollar companies residing here, yet we have some of the highest levels of poverty. And at the same time, we have some of the highest levels of pollution in the entire country. Everything that passes through the ports of LA and Long Beach right now, which we've got about 100 ships docked outside, polluting the equivalent of 100,000 diesel trucks that we've been dealing with for the past 2 months. Those trucks are going to come into our communities, and then they get on rail to probably go to Chicago, Joliet, in that area. So our solidarity here is to be able to resist corporate takeover, so that whatever happens here isn't affecting our folks out there. So thank you for having me.
Great. And up next, we're going to bring up a brother who worked very hard, tireless weekends, days, knocking doors, reaching out to the people. And the campaign issue that he ran on was water. Water is a human right, being that it needs to be affordable for the working class residents. The first, he made history, the first Latino elected to citywide office. I'm going to bring up Cesar. Why don't you do an introduction?
Thank you, Bertha. You give me too much credit here, man. I'm happy to be here. Roberto was right there alongside me the whole way on that campaign. Definitely a difficult fight, but we managed to pull it off. We managed to do it, and I think that's precisely because it was such a clear, almost good and evil kind of battle here. There was a very clear wrongdoing in our city. And there was a very clear reason to fight for what was right, and that is, again, to ensure that the residents of Joliet and in all of our surrounding communities have access to clean, safe, and affordable water. We were out there from day one knocking doors. It became very clear that this was going to become our leading issue very early on. We had a few different points that we wanted to run on, but what really got the best response from people at the doors is telling them, hey, did you know that your water bill may potentially triple? And suddenly, that 10-second window to catch people's attention has got them, very invested in it. And they say, hey, wait, what did you just say? And suddenly people who were not interested in local politics were very interested in local politics, right? Because there's a very clear, personal effect on how this is going to impact their individual lives. And we just found it very troubling that, there were so many people who weren't even aware that this was an issue. And that in itself is a problem, right? Not just that we have this impending water shortage, not just the fact that by 2030, we won't be able to reach peak demand of water consumption, but the fact that so many hundreds and hundreds of doors that we knocked early on were totally unaware that this was a problem. Which speaks to just that lack of communication between our residents and our local municipal government. And that was something that had to change in itself. And, we started campaigning around that there just wasn't being enough done to communicate this. And now that, I think we really made a push for this to become a forward issue. The other candidates in the campaign started picking up on it, realizing that this is something that we needed to address. And I think we really brought it to the forefront. But the fight goes on. It continues to this day, still feeling as though our city can do so much more to address this, because in conversations about what we're going to do to ensure that people have continued access to water, that they can continue to afford their monthly water bill, the conversation has really been centered around this idea of personal responsibility, right? Rather than corporate accountability, which we all know is really what's needed here. It's not enough to tell people, well, maybe you should just use a little bit less water. We really have to address, the underlying issue here, which is mismanagement, poor stewardship of our natural resources, and again, just holding these corporations accountable for using far more, orders of magnitude, much more water than any residential household is going to be using. And I think whatever we're able to accomplish here in Joliet really can be a foundation, can really set a precedent for what's possible in other cities, not just across the state of Illinois, not just in the Midwest, but really across the country.
Thank you, Cesar. And up next, we're going to have Mary from Food and Water Watch, a leading national organization on the fight for water. Also, Mary, I know was a part of the big fight in Baltimore. Let's bring up Mary to talk about, do an intro, and then we'll move into some questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. So I'm Mary Grant, the Public Water for All campaign director at Food and Water Watch. We're a national environmental organization. We mobilize regular working people to move the bold and uncompromised solutions to the most pressing food, water, and climate problems of our time. I get to work with our organizers on campaigns across the country to support affordable, safe, and publicly controlled water. We believe that water is a basic human right and a public trust resource that should be protected, held by the people, for the public well-being. And I'm from Baltimore, where we are part of the Baltimore Right to Water Coalition. As you just said, Roberto, it'll take a coalition to fight for water justice. And Baltimore has led on water in many ways. We were the first major city to outright ban water privatization. We banned some punitive collection practices. We stopped selling homes over unpaid bills. No one will lose their home or church because of an unpaid water bill anymore. We also stopped water shutoffs in Baltimore, even before the pandemic. But we're still working to implement our income-based water affordability program. It's a good model based on the Philadelphia model. We believe that it will take all of us coming together in a movement to make sure that every person has access to safe and affordable, publicly controlled water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. And if you're out there, out there on Facebook Live, if you're out there on the internet.com, give us a share this out. If you got any questions, put those in the chat. We'll try to get around to that. We're going to do a Q&A with some of the press at the end of this too, if they have any questions. The first question that I have is for Monica. And can you tell us about the local work you're doing with We the People of Detroit to protect the human rights to accessible and safe water?
Well, we're building on the work that really was started about 20 years ago, as I stated, by organizations like Michigan Welfare Rights, People's Water Board. But our mentor and our leader, the great Dr. Joanne Watson, along with the other legislative champion, Mary Ann Mahaffey, those women became legislative champions of water affordability. And that's something too that is very needed in this hour. And so having those legislative champions, those that understood the importance of the human right to water, understood how to use their collective power to convene the community to make sure there was a collective educating and understanding of the human right to water, and then building policies out that undergirded those ideas. What we've found right now is that as the city has struggled in an economic crisis of its own, not of its own making, that our water asset became a very critical target of corporate interest, not only for regionalization, but for privatization. When you look at the connective tissue of organizations and entities like the DeVos family and Eric Prince and the role that he played in providing security to Dan Gilbert as he was raiding the coffers of the city of Detroit as it relates to land. There was a major land grab that was connected to the unaffordability of water. You can live on a property without having lights and gas, as cold as it can get in Michigan, with no threat of having your children taken. But if you live in a home without sustained access to water for more, if you lose that access for more than 72 hours, there's a policy in Michigan that says that they can take your children. The only place that we saw that threat applied was in Detroit. So you saw many women of color, because the majority population here, 60% of the population is women of color, leading their households, providing for their families, and struggling to pay the ever increasing cost of water. Water rates have gone up over 438% in the last 2 decades. So that on its face is unaffordable. But then when you look at just the economic demographics of Detroit, 40% of the population lives in abject poverty. 70% of the people that work in the city of Detroit don't live in Detroit. So that too is an economic drain on the city because they're not a full participant in the tax base. So we've got all of these things working in concert against the very people that are most on the hook for maintaining this infrastructure. But we've also got to connect the dots to what's not happening federally. There must be a federal onus to the fact that the federal government has divested from water over the last 45 to 50 years. So when you put that calculation into effect, what you'll find is that they have gone from contributing about 67 to 69% of the dollars that went into the water infrastructure for the nation to now a dismal 7 to 9%. And so we've had to be able to remind people, one, who owns the system. We've had to remind people that water is part of a public good of creating and sustaining good public health. We've had to remind the community that you used to get reports that told you how many people could keep their water on and how many people could not. So why is it now such a mystery and very difficult? And we've had to legislate and litigate to get our own government at the local, state, and national level to believe that there is an important moment in this hour where we must hold all levels of government accountable. We shouldn't have to have a global pandemic to decide to cut water on and to stop shutting it off. And so that has been the message that we've had to carry, not only from the suites, but to the streets, that every person has to own this moment of accountability. Nobody's going to come and save us. We must be a part of saving ourselves and a part of declaring that part of that salvation is the human right to water.
Thank you so much. And you're getting me going over here. But corporate players, we need to hold them accountable. We need federal, state, and local action. I am with you, and we need to fight together. And that's why it feels so good to be bringing this panel together from across the country. So my next question is for Andrea. You are a member of Athena's environmental justice subgroup, which fights against Amazon's harmful environmental impacts. What are the ways in which Amazon is contributing to the environmental injustices in your community?
Yeah, thanks. So out here, we have lost a lot of we have a river that runs through our large counties of San Bernardino and Riverside. And that river, the Santa Ana River, we've lost more and more of it over the years, almost to the point where there is barely no visible water. It's all water underneath. And instead of it being a place of, trying to figure out how to revitalize it or create more access to the communities that live right next to it, instead, it has now become this place where it is bordered by warehousing projects. So now if you go across the Santa Ana River, what you're really going is along this trail of warehouses. And many of those warehouses are Amazon warehouses, which contribute to both the inaccessibility and then the pollution that comes from having types of projects like that so close to water sources. Like I mentioned it earlier, Amazon is the largest employer in the region. It also has the largest footprint, and it really clearly brings this race to the bottom effect in our communities, where we have different cities next to each other fighting for the company to come in. And we have about, I believe, 16 sortation and fulfillment centers. So I'm not talking about the delivery station that maybe has the vans. We're talking about 3 million square feet of warehousing for Amazon to bring in anywhere from 500 to 1,000 trucks a day in and out to be able to bring things in. We recently also had Amazon come into our airport and expand in our airport region. And this was an area that was public land that the city decided to sell to a developer, and the developer then was like, here's the red carpet for Amazon. And when that happened, there was a big community fight against this, because Amazon chooses to come into locations where there's already poverty happening. There's already this pathway from high school to warehouse already kind of established in the high schools. And then third, they're going into some of the most polluted areas and not bringing any type of mitigation. And that's why that airport case ended up in a lawsuit with our California Attorney General coming in saying that you cannot lie about the impact that you're bringing to the community. And that's one of the biggest things that Amazon's contributing to our community, is the fact that they're lying about what their impact really is. Because out here, they tried to say that their airport project with 27 flights and like 500 diesel trucks in a zip code that's already suffering from some of the most polluted areas, on an area that is a super fun site, supposedly was going to have no significant impact to the environment when they did their analysis. So they come in and they lie about it. And they also, I think, ended up lying about how many truck trips were going to happen. And we just got a decision from that court case, which says that like one of the dissenting judges was like, this is environmental racism 101, right? And we see Amazon not just do this in our community, but throughout the country. And some of the reports we've been able to show is that Amazon locates itself farthest from its shoppers, right? Farthest from the communities that are shopping the most. It actually comes into the zip codes that are shopping the least and bringing in the most burden for us to bear, for us to shoulder on our backs. And then lastly, Amazon is coming in and getting away from the responsibility by saying they're going to offset it in another place. They're going to go buy the credit somewhere else. They're putting some solar panels in another warehouse in another state. Yet we're over here dealing with the thousands of diesel trucks that are coming in and out. And that's not just in one place, but that's all over. And we can see them proliferating throughout our region and in other parts of the country. And in these areas, you've got the highest levels of asthma, the highest risk of cancer, the highest risk of other respiratory illnesses. This is an attack on the human body, right? It's not just an aesthetic thing. Although it is an aesthetic thing, it's also a traffic thing. Our community is losing time away from their families for the commutes. Us losing infrastructure costs, tax money that should be going into the community goes into solving the issues they bring into our community. And on top of that, they're also taking this invisible human health side. So.
Great, thank you so much. And next we're going to move on to Cesar. Your campaign for the Joliet City Council focused heavily on the water issues in Joliet. Can you share why you feel that tackling this issue is so critical for Joliet working families?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't something that we decided for ourselves was critical or was the most pressing issue. It really was something that was informed to us just in the number of doors we were hitting. As I mentioned before, it became very apparent that this was the leading issue that working class people cared about. We could come in and we can talk to them about other infrastructure projects. We could talk to them about budgets. We could talk to them about policy proposals. But at the end of the day, water is such a fundamental core aspect of our lives that this is a universal issue that impacts every single person that lives in the city. We ran a very progressive policy platform, and we would encounter people on the other side of things at the doors, and who would kind of respond with well, I want less government, I want smaller government, I want less government involvement. And we would kind of have these back and forth exchanges, and I'd say to them, well, you have to agree that at minimum, the one thing our city should be doing is running clean water to every household. And they'd say, well, yeah, of course, that's true. I'd say, okay, so then we can at least agree on that this is a universal issue that has to be addressed here. It's pressing to every single person living in our city. I think for all of the reasons that have been mentioned already, Monica and Andrea talked about the health aspects of all of this. Talked about kind of this intersectionality between other issues, elements of environmental racism. It's definitely a real thing that we see. When we consider that the people who would be impacted most by increasing rates in water are going to be those people who are already living in areas that have been stricken by poverty, right? And I've worked on a number of other issues, and we look at these different heat maps, and it's just alarming to see how much those maps correlate to each other as that almost perfect fit. When we worked on the census, there were areas that were considered difficult to count, right? And they were largely the east side zip codes in the city of Joliet, which have been historically communities of color. When we did outreach for COVID tracking and community health navigating, areas that were impacted disproportionately were those same communities. When we look at poverty rates, again, it's these same communities. And so increasing the cost of water is adding an additional layer of burdens to the communities that have already been impacted the worst by almost every other issue that our community is already facing. We would sometimes encounter this idea that people would say, oh, well, my water bill's not that expensive, and even tripling it, at the end of the day, I can afford it. So this is a non-issue. And it might be a non-issue for them, for that individual, but there are so many more people living on low income who are living on a fixed income, where an increase of a monthly water bill from, say, $40 to $80 is really going to put them in a difficult position. It's going to make them face these difficult decisions of prioritizing, do I want to pay my water bill first, or do I want to pay my electric bill first? Am I going to be able to cover my rent for this month? And this brings into a lot of questions. Monica, I think that was really eye-opening what you mentioned there about this policy being in place that if your water is cut off for 72 hours, you could have your children taken from you. I think we're potentially going down that same road here in Joliet. We're looking at the possibility of the lack of access to affordable water compounding these other problems that already exist. Again, and it's very troubling that as of now, what it feels as though our city's policy is just to tell people, well, assume personal responsibility and maybe use a little bit less, take shorter showers, don't water your lawn as often, because that's going to be the reality. We are going to have to do those things, but that's simply not enough, right? And to leave that burden entirely on the shoulders of these residents it's absurd. I think about places in the world that already have these kind of policies implemented. In my childhood, I spent almost every summer visiting my grandparents' home in Mexico, and where these kind of policies already exist. During peak hours of the summer heat, there is no water because most of it just tends to evaporate anyway. It's not unreasonable to think that if this problem goes entirely unmanaged and if we do nothing about it, that's the path that we're headed towards, where there will be a point where you can open up your faucet and there will be just simply no water running. And that's a scary thought to think of, but it's not impossible. And so the urgency of this issue, I think, is what places it on a scale, much higher than anything else that we're facing right now. There's plenty of issues that we have to tackle, but this was an issue that was so immediate, so in your face, that nobody could deny the importance of it. And I think, again, just realizing how much we use water in our everyday lives, and how that will have implications for every other aspect of these challenges that we're facing. If you don't have access to water in your home, you're probably not going to be able to do anything to address these other issues that you're already facing, right? It increases your health risk. It's going to disrupt your home life. It's going to make it that much more difficult to be able to lift yourself out of poverty, as nearly as impossible as it is already. And so access to water really is just this underlying issue that it's going to compound everything else that we're already facing.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all three of the last speakers, whether it's Detroit or the Inland Empire or Joliet. Often it's poor people of color who are facing the biggest burden. And a lot of times they're women and women heads of households. So thank you for uplifting that important point as well. We're going to move on to Mary. Can you give us an overview of the national landscape of water affordability issues and shutoffs?
Thank you for the question. Monica laid it out really clearly. Millions of people in the United States are denied access to water each year. There are many drivers, but like Monica said, it's austerity is at its core. Federal government cutbacks. Our water systems are aging. They're reaching the end of their useful lives. There's massive infrastructure needs. We have climate change, environmental pollution, corporate pollution of our waters, need to treat our water to higher standards. And then on top of all of this, massive federal government cutbacks. Federal funding for water infrastructure peaked in 1977. It peaked in the 1970s. Since then, it's fallen by 77% after you adjust for inflation. So cities are having to take on these improvements on their own. They're having all these other factors, corporate pollution and climate change, and having to fund it on their own. So it's leading to rate hikes on their customers. And water rates are incredibly regressive. Working people pay a disproportionate amount of their income on water bills. It is not it's not an equitable or a just way to fund these major improvements that benefit everyone and everyone's public health. Like Monica said, one study estimated that by next year, more than 1/3 of households are expected to be unable to afford their water bills by next year. And that study was before the pandemic happened. So before we account for the economic devastation of the pandemic on people's lives and their livelihoods, more than 1/3 of people were expected to struggle with their water bills by next year. The average low-income household is paying 12% of their total disposable income on water and sewer service. So 12% of your take-home pay on water and sewer service, that's by any metric unaffordable. That's 4 times what the United Nations considers to be affordable under their human rights framework. The United Nations says that for water and sewer to be affordable, you should pay no more than 3% of your income on water and sewer service. And it's a simple reality, a very simple reality. But when you get a bill that you can't afford to pay, you can't pay it, right? And so cities often use these really punitive measures to collect on bills when folks can't pay. They might send your home to tax sale. People lose their homes because of unaffordable bills, or your water service is shut off. You're denied access to water at home. Our national survey found that in a typical year, 2016, so before the economic devastation of the pandemic, in a typical year, the average utility shut off 5% of homes for unpaid water bills. So before the pandemic, 15 million people each and every year were being denied water that they need to drink, wash their hands, bathe, flush their toilets, cook their dinner, and live a life with dignity. In Baltimore, we heard stories about people buying a $20 a month gym membership because they had fallen so deep into water debt, they couldn't catch up. So their water was shut off at home, and so they were going to the gym to bathe. And last March, fortunately, more than 2/3 of cities and states actually paused shutoffs during the pandemic. They put local moratorium in effect, protecting millions of people from shutoff. Because what the CDC, your local government, your doctor was telling you is to wash your hands, to keep you and your family safe. These COVID protections prevented COVID infections and deaths. We worked with Cornell University on a study, and they found statistically significant lower rates of COVID infections and deaths when there was a water shutoff moratorium in place. We estimate that had there been a nationwide moratorium, had the CDC stopped water shutoffs like they stopped evictions, more than 9,000 lives and 500,000 people would have been prevented from being infected with COVID-19 through the end of 2020. But now it's November of 2021, almost December, and only 2 states still have shutoff protection still in effect. That's New York and California. I mean, New Jersey and California. So millions of people are continuing to face shutoff right now. They can't wash their hands. They cannot protect themselves, their families, and their communities from the spread of disease. We need to change how we pay for water. I think it's really clear that water is essential for public health. Everyone said it. It's essential for public health, public well-being. And how we're paying for it is not sustainable. It's not just, it's not equitable. Water rates are so incredibly regressive. And unless we fundamentally change the framework, more and more people will be priced out of basic water service. So we need corporations to pay their fair share.
Great, and we're about 15 minutes before the top of the hour, so we could go a little quicker on the second round. But I do want to ask a follow-up question, maybe both to Monica and Mary. Does the infrastructure package and Build Back Better help? And if not, what are some of the shortcomings of some of the federal legislation that's happening right now?
Definitely, I'll allow Mary because she's always my go-to on anything federal. But for me, I would say where it's going to get really dicey is in terms of how we are defining disadvantaged communities. Because what we find is that there's a lot of latitude that is granted in terms of making sure that those communities are not only equitable and just in terms of their treatment, but then making sure that the technical expertise that they're going to need at the state level to access state revolving funds, and also what they're going to need at the local levels to enact those dollars in a way that's meaningful. One of the things that we're lifting up is making sure that we're tie-barring these federal dollars at the state and local level to a community benefits agreement that will create more equitable and just training, contracts, and jobs and opportunities. We're also making sure that organized labor is at the table, knowing that they have a leadership role to make sure that those trainings and internships are made available to communities of color. And then the prioritization of those dollars and the building out of that infrastructure in communities where it's most needed. And so often we have to talk about in Detroit at other tables that it's not just about an urban fix, but it's also about making sure that we're reaching out to rural communities and giving them that tech support and that undergirding that they need so that they can take advantage of those dollars. Because if not, then that's another way that the issue is racialized and becomes divisive. And we believe that it has to be holistic.
I completely agree that implementation is going to be key. The federal infrastructure bill provides $55 billion for water projects nationally. So that's 11, and it's over 5 years. So that's $11 billion a year. It's a sizable amount of money, significantly more than has been paid for by the federal government in a long time. It's not the biggest investment in water infrastructure. Back when the Clean Water Act was passed, the federal government created the construction grants program. And if you adjust that for inflation, that was a bigger investment in our water. So it's not this groundbreaking, visionary infrastructure bill that we had wanted it to be. It falls far short. With the Build Back Better Act, if it passes the Senate, that would provide another nearly $10 billion for lead pipe removal. It's essential if we want to get these lead pipes out, we need more money. But together, even with the funding and the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better Act, it's not enough money to remove all lead pipes in the country. So we're going to need more federal support. The vision that we support is the Water Act, the Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act in Congress. It would roll back a tiny portion of the Trump administration's corporate income tax cuts to fully fund our water systems, providing $35 billion each and every year so that everyone has access to safe and affordable water. So just like a 3.5% increase in the corporate income tax rate could fully fund our water systems across the country. It kind of paints the contrast between where our priorities are as a nation, that we gave these massive tax cuts to corporations like Amazon, but that we're not funding our water infrastructure. But so at the local level, implementation is going to be key, but we also need local governments to step up and create income-based percentage of income affordability programs locally, because and to, as Monica said, to tie it to protections, to job creation, as well as to shut-off protections, and stopping the practices of tax sales of homes over unpaid water bills.
Well, thank you so much, Mary and Monica. Very important. We need a real Green New Deal to clean up our communities and put people to work. So I'll just say that. We'll try to go through this a little quicker. If people have questions and want to start putting them in the chat, but I think this is an important question from our water warrior in Detroit. for our people in Joliet. Why is it important to your community to fight to protect water rights? And what advice would you give to the people in Joliet who just launched their own campaign for water rights?
Really, it was about our own survival. One of the things that the Honorable Councilwoman Joanne Watson told us in 2010, as we were seeing the raiding of the coffers of the city of Detroit, the use of Veolia and the DeVos family to not only privatize public education, but also carve up union contracts and steal the major asset, which is the Detroit Water and Sewage Department. She told us, she said, nobody's coming to save you, and especially poor Black women, that we better deputize ourselves and get in some form of the fight and begin to use our own self-determination and talents and abilities. And so we did a couple of things. We organized and built our own research table where we have now 67 academics from across the country from every level of expertise you can think of, helping us really answer questions that the community has in terms of, you know, the austerity, the economic impacts, policies that would bring about greater equity and justice as it relates to water, being able to do an economic feasibility study, things that a lot of times are extremely expensive and time consuming, but are very necessary when you're trying to navigate all the complexities of who is managing and controlling your water access and your water quality. The second thing we did is we began to really invest in our young people. And so we begin to invest in them, not only being at the table and learning the science of water with groups out of Flint, like the Flint Development Center. We also organize with groups in Toledo, with Toledo Junction, to learn how to do economic development training. So all of these have been ways where community, somebody in the family has the expertise. And I would just suggest to Joliet, call on your family. We are here, and in some area of the fight, some of us have had to fight this fight for water justice, water equity, and the human right to water. You have a family, and we love you, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that you share in this equitable and just framework of water.
Thank you so much. We very much appreciate the solidarity. And Andrea, can you tell us about your local campaigns in California with the People's Collective for Environmental Justice to hold the warehouses in your area responsible for protecting the environment there?
Yeah, so since we're a little short on time, I'm gonna just go through three super important ones because obviously the one organizing our community is up front and center, right? Just organizing within our families, within our friends, within our neighbors is the most important part. But some of the strategies that we've taken to hold these really large corporations accountable in our community is one, regulation. We think regulation is really important. We think that the state government should step in and regulate entities such as warehousing, and that should not let them just escape through it. We were able to pass one of the first rules on warehousing called the indirect source rule out here, not throughout the state of California, just in our little air quality region. But that's gonna force all of these companies to, over the years, electrify their warehouses, bring in electric trucks. And if not, they have to pay for it. And if when they pay for it, that money goes straight back into the community, into an area right around where that warehouse is located. And so that's really important because we have a lot of truckers in our community that are being forced to modify their truck when they're misclassified, not as employees. So companies are saying, we're not going to pay for the trucks, you have to pay for it, when they're clearly an employee of that company. So we're hoping some of that money is going to go into truckers being able to upgrade their trucks, and also just to reduce harm, right? The sad reality is we do need air filters. We need air filters in the schools. We need air filters in our homes. The air quality is not safe for us outside. So that's one strategy and campaigns that we're running here. Another one is community benefits agreements. I heard Monica, you talk about that. I think that's so incredibly important. Like, communities should be able to negotiate with their government. They should be able to negotiate with the companies that come into their neighborhood. And so we've been fighting for community benefits agreements, both at the industrial development side, and then also right now on the retail side. It's a new thing for us out here in the Inland Empire. We got a really old wave of power that wants to just keep hold of that type of, extractive for-profit business. And so we're out here trying to change that paradigm. And then the last one is moratorium. So we are right now in a wave of warehouse moratoriums, which means let's put a pause. Let's put a pause on all warehouse development and let's study them. Let's see how much are they costing our infrastructure? What kind of jobs are they bringing? What is the environmental impact that's happening to it? And it's really important, right? Because out here we have communities that the city or the county is bargaining with them that we'll give you a sidewalk, we'll give you sewage, we'll give you water infrastructure. But for that, you're going to have a warehouse right in front of your high school and your middle school and your elementary school. That's how they're bargaining it off, as if it's one for one, right? And so we ask ourselves, well, where is all the money going? Why can't you just pay for this outside of that? So a moratorium, in a way, we want our governments to study that, right? And where can you get money from it? And something that you said, Monica, was really important too, was the fact that all of this is associated with water debt. And I just want to full circle it, because out here, although we might have like about 10% water debt in the region, some zip codes are as high as 78% in water debt. So some of these families have been holding on to debt throughout the entire pandemic. And that debt is not going to just go away after the pandemic or the moratorium is over. And that's really connected, because these are the same zip codes where it's higher people of communities of color, and it's also the places where all the warehouses are located. So an answer to why can't people pay their debt? Oh, is it because of what the types of jobs and opportunities that are being brought in? So just wanted to connect that. So thank you.
Thank you. And the last couple of questions, the next for Cesar. The city of Joliet has taken steps to prepare for the transition of Lake Michigan water, including forming a regional water commission. Can you tell us about and why you think that your peers on the city council have to go further to ensure affordable water?
Yeah, so I think this the regional commission, I mean, really was one of the first big hurdles that we've cleared. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. The cost of this pipeline, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in scale, possibly up to $1 billion project. And we, the residents, ultimately are going to have to pay for that one way or another. And so by including more communities, but through the formation of this regional commission, you spread that cost per capita across more individuals. So ultimately, you're driving the cost down for every resident. So that's a huge step in the right direction. But it only brings you so far, right? And being 1 yard away from the goal line is not a touchdown. So we really need to close that final gap in the in kind of the logistical chain. And this project, sure, it guarantees that the city of Joliet will have access to water, but it doesn't ensure that our most vulnerable communities, that our individual households are going to have access to water. And I think the final step in that, in closing that gap, is creating a pricing structure that is kind of what might call a progressive rate, right? We need to look at a graduated rate for water pricing, and which we have to some degree already, but it definitely needs to be revisited. I think there's only, as it stands, about 3 tiers, and it goes from a small increase, and then it's just with no cap at the end. So a very large household could potentially be using the same as a large business, and that's just insane to think about. When we consider that there are warehouses that are using 100 times more water than any one household, it only makes sense that that an account of that size, of that scale, should be charged at a higher rate. I think it was a little disappointing to see some feedback from our mayor, who said that a proposal like this, I believe his exact words were something to the effect of he didn't think that it would have a material benefit for our residents, and that was just very, very disappointing to hear, because as Mary mentioned earlier, I think it was just a 3.5% tax would be able to cover the cost of these water projects across the country, and as you mentioned, in order for that project to be completed, in order to see the full vision of that realized, we need to be operating at the local level, again, creating these pricing structures that are based on equity, that are informed by much more accurate data about what water consumption is for a residential account versus for a commercial or industrial account. Realizing that there are these large scale water consumptions, users are working at orders of magnitude larger than any one residential household. And so it's not a stretch of the imagination to think that, well, if you're using 100 times more water, you should probably be paying more than a 10% increase or a 20% increase. And when we begin to implement that here at the local level, I think then it becomes much more possible to see that realized fully at the federal level. So that's going to be, I think, the necessary final step, right? And sure, we formed this regional commission. Sure, we're developing a pipeline. Yes, we've guaranteed access to the city, broadly speaking, but until you can guarantee that that I, as a resident, or that my grandmother who's on a fixed income will still be able to turn on her faucet and have water running through, that none of what you're developing before that really matters until you can guarantee that last step.
Great. And sorry, we are going a bit over time. I do apologize. Thank you to all the people who have stuck with us. Mary, in your work with Food and Water Watch, what have you seen other cities do to make water affordable for working families? And have you seen other cities help fund affordability programs by introducing graduated water rate structures for corporations?
Great questions. So Monica would know more, but Detroit kind of pioneered the idea of a real affordability program for water, the percentage of income water affordability program, which would tie water bills to household income, meet people where they're at. And so Philadelphia was the first city to fully implement the income-based water affordability program with debt forgiveness. Water debt, I heard Andrea say, is such a big issue across the country. So Philadelphia's program has debt forgiveness component. So debt is forgiven when you're enrolled in this affordability program. That resolution passed in 2015. Baltimore has passed a law to set up a similar program, and full implementation we're hoping will be done by next month. Toledo, Ohio is moving to set up one of these programs. And just water is new for looking at these types of programs, but it's super common in the electricity and gas sectors to have percentage of income payment plans with what's known as arrearage management components. So these are debt forgiveness components. And it's time to apply those lessons from where the electricity and gas sector to the water sector. So also, I think part of what your question was about how common it is for corporations to be charged an increasing block rate too, to be charged more for larger volumes of water. That's super common. Increasing block rates are used by like 3/4 of water systems in Arizona, 2/3 of water systems in Massachusetts, half of water systems in Georgia. So across the country, it's a super common, very common framework to charge super large volume users, industrial, commercial users, these very large corporations, more for using more water, because it costs more to produce more water. The more water you use, you're going to have to find new sources of water, and that can cost more for everyone on the system. So their burden should be higher. They should pay their fair share to make sure that water rates are affordable for everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And we have I think we can do a few more. Are there any questions from any of the media here, for any of the panelists? You're free to follow up with us afterwards too. Anyone? Any questions online? Okay.
Roberta, is it possible to share the link or any contact for the Joliet group so that we can share it out through our networks?
Definitely. We're happy to share all the information, Cesar's and some of the activists here today.
All right. Thanks so much.
Well, if there's no questions, I want to thank everyone for your time. This was such a powerful discussion and event, and I know that we can fight and we can win. I know that we can make corporate America pay their fair share, and we can hold our public officials accountable to make the real investments that our communities need, that our working class families need, to make sure that water stays affordable, that it's good quality water, and that it's safe. Lastly, I do want to do a call of action around the North Point project that's being proposed in Joliet. They want to build almost 3,500, 4,000 acres of new warehousing without having a plan for how to deal with the water infrastructure, how to deal with the labor problems in the warehouses and the community concerns. My sister Andrea said it, we need a moratorium. We need responsible development. So join Warehouse Workers for Justice, Just Say No to North Point, and all of our community allies, and go into Joliet City Council on December 21st, 6:30 p.m. We need everyone to show up. We need all of our allies to have our back, and we need our champions like Cesar Guerrero to know that the community is with him when these votes happen. So please, 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 please turn out everyone you can for those in Joliet. We can't have affordable water while we're expanding by over billions of square feet, more industrial warehousing and manufacturing without any plan to deal with any of these issues. So please join us on December 21st. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining all these great groups. We hope this is just a start of a powerful collaboration to fight for water, environmental, and worker justice around the country. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us today. And forward.